Hello, good evening, everybody. I can see a lot of new faces, so maybe I should start by introducing myself. My name is Miguel Garcia. I'm the Dean of Physical Sciences, and I'm really delighted to preside at this amazing event. Let's see. I really could not be prouder to stand on this stage on behalf of the College of Letters and Science, and my colleague deans of the college, who really play an important role in this event and what we hope will be the future of this event. I would like to first take a moment to appreciate this truly magnificent space, the UCLA Mayor and Renee Luskin Conference Center. And I think we should give a tremendous applause to Mayor and Renee for making this premier meeting possible. I think this place is spectacular. I think, it's just beautiful, so thank you. This conference center will host world-class academics, innovators, leaders, and visionaries. Here they will meet to exchange ideas and shape our world. The world we will inherit in the year 2050 and beyond. And not only did Mayer and Renee Luskin provide an amazing space for the UCLA community, they also provided an endowment for the UCLA College to ensure that symposiums like this one will take place every year. So our community will be able to convene here once a year on the sponsorship of their generous support for the college. Tonight, we begin that endowment's legacy with the inaugural UCLA College Luskin Endowment Symposium, Earth Now, Earth 2050. UCLA is a thought leader and a premier research institution in a wide range of subject matter. For this inaugural symposium, myself and the college deans wanted to choose a topic that permeates all of UCLA's disciplines. It is incredible to see at this pivotal point in our planet's history that across this UCLA campus, across all of UCLA departments, you will see the positive impact our faculty and students are having on sustainability. Physical sciences, life sciences, humanities, social sciences, and undergraduate education are all providing a wealth of knowledge about our Earth now and guiding us to an Earth we will want to inhabit in the year 2050. This inaugural UCLA College Luskin Endowment Symposium, Earth Now, Earth 2050, will showcase the environmental progress being made. From public policy discussions to high school student films, I'm really looking forward to that. This event will explore all facets of modern environmental challenges and highlight UCLA's efforts to make our lives and business more sustainable. The event will also showcase this LEED Gold Certificate Luskin Conference Center. So thank you again, Mayer and Renee Luskin, for making this center and symposium possible. A special thank you is also in order for Peter Kareva, the director of the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. Peter and the Institute are the organizing body for this Earth Now, Earth 2050 symposium. Peter brings a wealth of experience from his time with leading environmental organizations, such as the former chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy, a co-founder of the Natural Capital Project, an acting director of the Science for Nature and People, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, and a member of the National Academy of Sciences. It is my pleasure to introduce Peter Kareva, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Peter, please.
Great. Well, this will be fun. So, Dr. Sullivan, some of you may not know this, but she's local. So she grew up and went to high school in Woodland Hills. And she's a product of the great UC system, and I'm a real admirer of the UC system. Went to UC Santa Cruz. Many of you know that she went on to NASA and of course achieved star fame for being the first woman to walk in space, several space missions, was on the mission that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. Lots of leadership positions. Many, many honors. I'm going to list all the honors. The most recent, she was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. It's baseball season now, so that's like Cooperstown. You know, it's a Hall of Fame for engineers. So it's a big deal. You're soon going to see you'll see in her talk, just her incredible intelligence and her depth and sort of the expanse of her vision. I wish you could all know her a little better because there's another dimension that you may not see. Some of it will come through. She's one of the most amazingly generous and warm people I know. This morning, she's busy. She's got a crazier schedule than any of us. She went to a school to talk to kids. This afternoon, you know, I asked her if she would have coffee with some of my students because I knew they would be inspired by her. And you can imagine what her schedule is and getting ready for this. And she stopped and she told them stories, which she does very, very well, and they were thrilled, and they're out here in the audience. And most people wouldn't have squeezed that in. Maybe she also has this, she's filled with wonderful quotes, and I'm not going to give you all her quotes. I'm just going to give one of my favorites, and you can dwell on it and kind of figure it out. A lot of her quotes you kind of dwell on and figure out. The runway behind you and the altitude above you don't do you any good. You can think about that. Perhaps she's just filled with those. And so I deeply think there's just no better person in the world, really no better person in the world to open this center. And this is really about a celebration of all the different things that are going on in UCLA in the environmental arena. So welcome home, Dr. Sullivan. Kathy.
Well, thank you very much. I always know if Peter's got the microphone and is going to introduce me, I know two things are true. It will be a gracious and generous and humorous introduction, and the second thing is I might just be in a little bit of trouble. But thanks very much for that very spirited introduction, and also to Miguel, to our dean. Thank you for the invitation to be here on campus, and let me add my thanks to Meyer Murnell Luskin. It's a great privilege to me to be here back in the LA area and be a part and play a role in kicking off this fabulous thing that you've started. I particularly want to salute you for the wisdom and the foresight to not just make this physical facility possible, but to help make sure the intellectual juices can continue to flow for a long time to come. I've done my share of fundraising. Not all donors have that insight and foresight. So thank you very much. And I also want to add my thanks to all of you. It is baseball season. There's something going on up at Chavez Ravine. It's 1-zip Dodgers in the bottom of the third, by the way. We'll keep you posted. You can put your cell phones down. So I really do appreciate all of you taking time from that exciting LA news to be here as well. So let's just jump right into this. Today in 2050, if you go by the averages of the last couple of years, we can expect that about 6 babies will be born just next door at the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center today. 6 new kiddos in the world. They're going to take their first breaths, they'll hear their first sounds, and open their eyes for the very first time in this really spectacular city. And for the most part, they will be instantly blessed with more opportunity than most on this planet will ever have. Some may certainly experience hardships in their first years, but at a minimum, most of these babies will have access to clean food and water. They'll be protected from the elements, and they'll have a bed on which to sleep at night. So there you go. 6 folks joined us today on this planet. So now imagine 34 years from today, October 18th, 2050. Today's new kiddos are celebrating their 34th birthday. Some of them might be in the workforce. Some may be finishing the degree they started way back when. Some undoubtedly already have families of their own. What actually does their world look like? Will that group be among the population that's abandoning the LA basin? Or will they be among those that are still here welcoming those who continue to flock in? What about their parents? And what about their grandparents? In 34 years, what will their life be like here in LA, or for that matter, in other places across this country of ours? This symposium was created, and we're gathered here this evening to start a conversation around those kinds of questions, to ask ourselves and explore ideas about how we might determine what actions we might take that can help determine and set the course towards a future that meets the hope of these future generations. So what I'd like to do to start that off is start with a little bit of a look at some of the challenges that today are facing our communities and our planet and the natural world. And I've had quite an interesting set of opportunities over the course of my career, as Peter alluded to gather some unusual, not uncommon perspectives on these questions. During my 15 years at NASA, I got to see with my own eyes both the awesome power and the really remarkably elegant fragility of this planet, and marvel at the really rich visual ways in which you could see the intricate interweaving of all of the natural systems that make this little planet of ours work. Some years later, running a science museum and a research center in Ohio, where I currently live, I came to appreciate the challenge, but also the vital importance of making people excited about science and curious and interested in applying that knowledge and that capability to sustainability and stewardship. And my seat now at NOAA gives me another unique perspective on the statistics, the facts and figures of where we stand today and what we know about the driving forces that are going to impact our future world and impact our future progress. So wrapping all that together, let me offer you a few things that seem really quite clear, both to my perception and frankly just from the data, sort of just the facts, ma'am, stuff, if you will. Rising sea levels will put between $8 billion and $10 billion worth of existing California coastal property underwater or in jeopardy of frequent severe flooding by 2050. Okay, this is a state in which 80% of the state's gross state product flows from the 87% of California residents who live within coastal counties. So that should be a worrisome trend. That's something to keep an eye on. In that same year, Californians will see 2 to 3 times the number of 95-degree days as the state has experienced over the past 30 years. That's projected to lead to something between 2 to 15 additional annual deaths per 100,000 citizens. Higher heat. Furthermore, there's a companion point to that. Higher daytime temperatures, as we're seeing already in the data, are accompanied by warmer overnight temperatures as well. Fewer cold days and nights mean less opportunity to recover from severe daytime heat, and that can create severe consequences not only for human health and productivity, but also for agriculture. For example, higher nighttime temperatures, higher overnight lows, shorten the pollination period for California's almond trees, which produce 80% of the world's almond stalks. In addition, most regions in California will see a decrease in fall and spring precipitation, plus longer dry spells between storms. Hopefully not as long a dry spell as the Cubs have had in baseball, but a long dry spell. But take all those factors together, temperatures, sea levels, precipitation changes. These are factors that threaten to fuel large and costly wildfires, threaten to endanger water resources, to drive up energy costs, to exacerbate air pollution, and compromise human health. Well, that can start to sound like a pretty grim picture, and after I go through all of those projections, you might think that I envision inevitably a future that's a bit like Wall-E's future, a very barren and inhospitable Earth. And it's not the case. I don't believe that our fate is predestined. I don't think this dystopian future is inevitable. Instead, my perspective is shaped by the insights and experiences I've gained over my full career that tell me there's still lots of actions we can take. There are things we can do better. There are levers that we can use, knowledge we can apply to, in fact, shape our future more closely to one that matches our aspirations. We have more opportunities at our fingertips today to bolster the resilience of our societies and our economies and our natural environments than ever before. So what's that going to look like? What is that going to take? Today I want to focus on these two aspects of that challenge. And I'll go lightly on the first component, the need to limit the impact on this planet, limit our impact on this planet, which is conventionally referred to as the mitigation side of the equation. And I'll spend the bulk of my comments talking about the need to improve the resilience of our world and reduce our vulnerability to these changing climate trends known as adaptation. I believe firmly we're going to need to apply both of these, both wisely and well and consistently, to shape that kind of future that we would hope to see. So let's start on the mitigation side of the equation. The Obama administration has done a number of things, as I'm sure many of you have followed, to really improve the equation on this side of the ledger, reducing carbon emissions, stabilizing levels of other heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The President's Climate Action Plan, when fully implemented, will put the United States on a pace to cut nearly 6 billion tons of carbon pollution through 2030. That's equivalent to taking every car in the United States off the road for 4 years. That's a significant dent in the problem. So we've got to keep working together on this, of course, because mitigation efforts in one country or the lack of them in another country spill beyond borders. This globe mixes its atmosphere in completely rich ways. There are no borders when it comes to how the atmosphere behaves. And so that tells us we do have to keep working together across all of the countries on this planet to protect what Pope Francis so eloquently calls our common home. And so I was quite inspired to be in Paris last winter and see and talk to and watch the progress that was being made by a number of global leaders that were involved at the 21st Conference of the Parties under the UN Climate Change Convention. And to see the scale of commitments that the nations participating there, a greater number of nations than participated in any of the preceding UNFCCC conferences, to see the scale of those commitments and the strength of them and the measures of mutual accountability that have been put into place. Let me give you a quick glimpse of what those commitments stack up to. The basic scientific projections for how our climate will evolve as CO2 levels go up and the rate at which carbon dioxide was increasing in the atmosphere long suggested that we're on track for 3.3 to 3.8 degrees centigrade of global warming by the end of this century, by 2100. That's the business as usual range that you see shown here in red. A little bit of a range on the out years depending on what measures countries actually take, but generally this presumes economies continue to grow, the relationship between economies and carbon emissions stay roughly the same as today, and that's the world that we end up with. But thanks to the new commitments made by the nations that convened at Paris, we've dropped those projections by about 1 degree centigrade. That's still above the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's target or preferred goal of 2 degrees centigrade, but significantly below the business as usual case. That's encouraging. But even more encouraging, COP21 established a framework for encouraging countries to ratchet up the ambition of their pledges every 5 years. And if that indeed happens, those ratchet up commitments could move the trajectory down to the blue envelope that you see here, down towards that blue line, that less than 2 degrees centigrade line. That less than 2 degrees centigrade line matters to all of us, but it matters in particular to the small and developing island states scattered across the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. And the Obama administration has also advanced our global protection of the oceans. The oceans are, after all, the life support system that sustains us ourselves. Every other breath you take comes from the ocean. A huge proportion of the protein that feeds our global populations, about 1/6, comes from the ocean. The ocean economy employs millions across the globe. The oceans generate our weather and temper our climate. They are the engine and the foundation of all life on this planet, even us, even my fellow denizens in the great Midwestern state of Ohio. We are all ocean people. If you live on this planet, you're an ocean person. And under President Obama's leadership, ocean stewardship and conservation are now priorities at the level of foreign affairs ministers and heads of state. Not just environment ministers, not just conservation organizations, but many, many countries around the planet that have convened 3 times now in international Our Oceans conferences, each time bringing additional pledges of marine protected areas, of sustainable fishing measures. And not only has that been 3 very effective conferences during the Obama administration, but the administration, rather like our sponsors here tonight, had the foresight to ensure that other nations would step up and commit already to hosting those conferences and keeping that engine going in the years ahead. And as a result of all of that, illegal fishing and marine pollution are both down. The number of marine protected areas that are under conservation measures is dramatically up, including the restoration and protection of coastal habitats like seagrasses and mangroves and salt marshes, all of which play vital roles both in absorbing the energy of coastal storms, but also helping sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Blue carbon, these blue coastal habitats, sequester carbon at a rate that's actually 10 times greater than tropical rainforests. So if you really want to go into sequestration, by all means, do continue with tropical forest afforestation and cutting the rates of terrestrial deforestation, but restore the coastal habitats of this planet. They're nursery grounds for fish, they're shelter and protection for storms, and they sequester 10 times the carbon. So those are significant steps forward from the government side. But to really get the mitigation equation done is going to take all segments of society. Again, as the President has recognized, and under the American Businesses Combating Climate Change initiative that the White House launched, this President has cut the environmental impact of American businesses from energy efficiency through water consumption. As you see here, 154 companies have now signed on to this this pledge, this climate action pledge, to demonstrate their support. What does that look like in some real tangible numbers? By 2025, Google and Nike have both committed to be 100% renewable energy. Hershey is committed to cut their greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2025. The Bank of America will have invested $125 billion in environmental financing programs, and Nestle is pledged to use 144 million gallons less of water just here in the state of California. And the other 138 companies have made similarly bold and ambitious pledges. So what about adaptation? Mitigation is about avoiding the impacts you can't manage, but some of the impacts of increasing carbon in our atmosphere are already being realized, and the lag time for the equilibration to CO2 in the atmosphere reaches out in front of us. So some consequences are locked in that we're just going to have to be ready for and manage the effects of, no matter how aggressively we move out to manage and reduce carbon emissions. So how do we build climate resilient infrastructure? What measures can we take to protect our economy, to sustain the vitality and viability of our natural resources? And what kind of data and information do we have to try to do these things? Well, there's a number of things, happily. And again, this is happily not any longer just the focus of the nations that are on the front line of experiencing these changes, such as the Pacific Island states. 142 out of the 162 commitments made by the nations of the world since COP21 include adaptation. That's a first for this Conference of the Parties. The emphasis in all the preceding gatherings was so strongly just on mitigating emissions, not much attention had been paid to trying to help societies and the economy and the environment itself work through these changes. There's now also an obligation the President has placed on all United States federal agencies that we factor climate resilience into all of our investments in the developing world. Sort of think ahead and help these countries plan ahead for the conditions that they'll be dealing with 5 and 10 and 30 and 50 years down the road, not just the needs of today. These are the countries that contribute the least to this problem, but are under the gun to experience the most consequences and to experience them soonest. What about here on the home front? I've had the great good fortune, and really it's been quite a pleasure, to support the creation of a number of new climate adaptation initiatives across the family of federal agencies. The President convened an interagency climate change adaptation task force that developed an agency-by-agency and topic-by-topic action plan, which are now baked into the operations and the mission objectives of all of our agencies. The Department of Transportation, for example, now factors NOAA predictions about higher impact weather events into the design parameters for their coastal highway projects. My own department, the Department of Commerce, is turning growing demand for clean energy and sustainable products into competitive advantage for U.S. manufacturers abroad. And the Department of Homeland Security now evaluates the national security implications of changing conditions along the Arctic and along our borders. Thankfully, the President has also recognized and supported strongly the notion that proper scientific understanding, sound, reliable scientific understanding about the current and the future state of our planet is an absolutely indispensable component of all of these endeavors. And at NOAA, we call that timely, reliable, actionable information about the world around us and about what its state or condition will be out into the future. We call that environmental intelligence. And producing that happens to be our bread and butter. It's what we do every day. This starts with taking the pulse of the planet through a plethora of instruments. You see several of them suggested here, ships and airplanes and buoys and autonomous gliders all across the planet, sharing the data that we take with nations around the world so we each have a very rich, robust picture of the planet, melding these real-time data with decades worth of understanding of how the Earth works that has been garnered through research done here at UCLA and countless other academic institutions, and fusing that all via mathematical representations into modern-day global models that do everything from predict tomorrow's weather to give us the outlook on these climate conditions that we will have to face and be prepared for in the future. Let me give you a couple of examples of how that environmental intelligence is being put into action right here in California on an everyday basis. In 2007, San Diego Gas and Electric was devastated. Their infrastructure was devastated by the California wildfires that charred just over 1 million acres, and you see the smoke plumes as captured by satellite here in this image. And in response, SDG&E joined forces with NOAA and other federal partners to develop a 60-day forecast system for fire weather across the region. So give people the foresight about when they might be in a tough fire situation, get the firefighters into place, protect assets that may be in harm's way. And so today, the Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index draws forecasts from a number of weather sensors across the region and puts those out to the firefighting community so they can be pre-positioned in the high-risk areas. It alerts emergency responders and homeowners when they need to start evacuating or watering down their yards or roofs, and it tells the utility companies, gives them the lead time they need to think about how to protect their infrastructure in these high-risk zones. What about climate risk planning at more than 60 days? Longer-term planning, well beyond months, is clearly pretty critical to the resilience of LA's coastal infrastructure. And as you know better than I do, that includes 2 of the major power plants, 2 of the wastewater treatment facilities, and not inconsequentially, the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. In fact, some of these assets already flood routinely on just a routine high tide. So with that in mind, officials from the city and from these different facilities, including NOAA's own Sea Grant program, joined forces in 2014 to model the region's physical, economic, social, and ecological vulnerability to climate change. And you all know that, I hope, as the effort called Adapt LA. That team created an assessment, many of the assessments done using tools from NOAA's Climate Resilience Toolkit, like the sea level rise viewer you see animated here. This shows what happens around the Venice and Marina del Rey area if and as sea level rises from current level to up to about 6 feet. And the headline from all of this analysis is pretty straightforward. By 2050, Los Angeles needs to be ready for a single flooding event that could cause between $400 million and $800 million of damage. One flooding event, over $500 million of consequence. In these models, the Venice and the coastal region's roads and water systems are obviously the most vulnerable things to sea level rise. Low-lying neighborhoods, many of whom are inhabited by people with low incomes or where there are language barriers or older housing stock that increases the risk, places like Venice and San Pedro and Wilmington. All those findings and a series of subsequent training workshops for city officials turned the assessments into meaningful actions that are underway now. Venice is piloting new techniques for tracking beach erosion so they can know where their vulnerability is changing. Santa Monica is restoring sand dunes to protect their coastal infrastructure. And Ventura is moving parking and bike lanes landward to assure that the beach can actually move with rising sea levels without interrupting those thoroughfares. Unfortunately, as we certainly know at NOAA, and I suspect many of you appreciate as well, this kind of environmental intelligence doesn't make it into nearly all of the decisions that I would argue that it should. Coastal developments, significant housing and facility infrastructure investments are still made in risky areas, low-lying areas, where natural storm surge defenses like dunes and wetlands are torn down, replaced with gray infrastructure or hardened infrastructures. Cities continue to not plan well for growing population demand and changing drinking water supplies. I was shocked to learn early this year that city planners who organize in a group called the American Planning Association most commonly do not get and are not directed to factor water needs and water supply into the plans they develop for their communities. They're handed a plan that says we're going to build this here, mixed-use shopping and retail, office or residential. We're going to build this here. Go figure out the water, as opposed to what's the water environment that we're in. What does it make sense? What's sustainable to build where? Where are we exposing ourselves to water risk that we didn't appreciate? This happens all over the world. If you look at China's map of where they plan to locate new thermoelectric power plants, they're planning to locate most of their new coal plants in the north, where most of the coal is, to presumably minimize the shipment distance for the fuel supply. But if you lay over on top of that, where is China's water risk and water scarcity most severe? It's in those same areas. So you'll have a new power plant and it'll be right near the coal supply, but it may well not have the water needed to cool it and operate it. So these disconnects happen quite a bit. A lot of businesses continue to see environmental stewardship, so-called ESR, environment and social corporate responsibility, as a philanthropic vehicle for burnishing their reputation or gaining goodwill, rather than important tool for mitigating real risks. So we've been asking ourselves over the last couple of years at NOAA very often the important question of what might it take to change that? What might it take to spur smarter and more widespread uptake of these sorts of insights and this kind of foresight in business decisions, in social decisions? And is there anything we might do on the side of providing data and information that could help spur that? I don't have, of course, all of the answers. I don't pretend to that degree of foresight at all. But I am confident that when it comes to NOAA, improving the caliber of our environmental intelligence, making it more local, more regional, proper scaled, more comprehensible, is going to be one of the key ingredients of helping this move forward, and it's got to stay one of our key priorities. We're making some progress in increasing the spatial and temporal accuracy and the reliability of our data. We're on target to deliver a new fleet of weather and climate satellites that will collect 60 times more data every day about the planet than we currently collect. One is slated to launch about a month from now. The other will follow sometime early mid next year. We've got new supercomputers that are more capable of processing the influx of information. I'm talking tens of billions of data points about the Earth every 6 hours. That's what it takes to make your weather forecast. It's got to be fresh data recently collected to make your weather forecast worthwhile. And we've got our computational models poised to revolutionize the caliber of our foresight in other domains as well, notably in the domain of water. But we really recognize keenly at NOAA that being super good at the science is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. We've got to get also a lot better at understanding what the decision is that's really being made in the real world, and actively trying to make sure that our information and the way we provide it clicks and connects seamlessly and easily with that decision framework. Not with the way I wanted to put it out, but the way you needed to receive it, and the subset of information you needed to go right to the point on your answer. I'll give you a great example. My scientists would love to take our hurricane forecasts, which are really quite good 5 days out, and see if, like in the 90-some high percent level, and see if they could bump that up to 99.999, or could they push that performance level out to day 6 or day 7. Valid scientific quests. But if I go talk to Craig Fugate over at FEMA, he could care less if we're 99.999 at day 5, or if we could do that at day 7. Craig Fugate needs high reliability at day 4, 4 days before landfall. That's when he's going to start talking to governors and adjutants general and recommending evacuations. That's when he's going to start mobilizing his action teams, his first responders. That's when he's going to start teeing up and urging the president to tee up preparatory disaster declarations. People are going to start shifting gears, closing businesses, boarding up homes, moving assets, moving people, dropping their jobs to volunteer to help at day 4. So if we're 85% good at day 4 now, he'd love it if we could be 87 or 89. That's the hinge point that really matters. And we work really very hard at NOAA to try to understand where those hinge points are when it comes to the people that are looking for information and insight that can help them shape their decisions. We had a series of national town halls on water resources and the science and capability to predict and make assessments of water resources over this past summer. And your very own water manager, one of the key people at California, LA Department of Water, Metropolitan Water, Janine Jones, many of you probably know her name, little fire plug of a gal. She held up one of our current forecast products, literally in the meeting, and said, "You give me this right now. It's a seasonal outlook, you say. I might as well read the LA Times horoscope. You know, this is not doing anything for me." And that's exactly the kind of blunt feedback we were looking for. Where are we not giving you the spatial scale? Or where is it not temporally significant? What is it we don't have scientifically that we could mount a research effort to develop? And she was right on point with that. And that's changing the course of our R&D efforts at NOAA. We're focusing much more sharply on making the specific precipitation prediction that she needs. Right now, that's beyond the capability of the science, but we're going to attack that problem and see with our academic partners and see if we can't bust down that barrier. So that's one part. We're going to work hard to direct our science well, to be on point with what users of our data need, to understand how they need it and when, not just what we like to put out. But there's another piece that we've also been working a lot on over the last few years at NOAA, and I know from the dinner gathering I was at last night, many people in this community and perhaps many of you in this room are working on this as well. I think, and we think, that the next important step is going to be to find ways that this kind of environmental intelligence more richly and more consistently connects to everyday classic business and economic decisions that are made across the face of the planet, in small businesses and large businesses, by investment banks, by the major underwriters, by ratings agencies that determine the risk posture, or that opine on the risk exposure and risk posture of publicly traded companies. And I think if and when we can make this connection more richly, we will really see a very different approach to applying and using climate information and the foresight we have about future risk, and factoring that into design and financing and many other decisions. And that's why through the course of my tenure at NOAA, I've done things that sound very strange for a NOAA administrator. I've gone to London to meet with the Bank of England and with Newton Investments to understand where and how do they see opportunity to factor take these sort of risk factors into account. What sort of data, what sort of metrics, what sort of parameters would they need? What reliability or specificity would they need for that to be usable and assimilatable in their decision framework? I've met with the officials at the New York Stock Exchange, a number of folks both at Bloomberg Foundation and Bloomberg Companies, many other financial institutions, again, to try to make sure we're attuned to what they might need or where they see the opportunity might be emerging, and we're doing whatever we can from within NOAA to serve up, to acquire and process and serve up that sort of information and make the kind of foresight that we can provide more tangible and more actionable to folks facing really challenging, big, high-stakes, real-world decisions every single day. So, in closing, the consequences of our changing climate are no longer hypothetical. It cannot be up for debate that we live on a very dynamic planet. We're seeing the consequences of shifts in those dynamics around us every single day. And while the challenges that we'll face in the next 34 years will surely be great, I think it would be a grave mistake to let the potential scale of them deter us from action. As one of our nation's governors has said, we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change, and the last generation that can do anything about it. My career leaves me confident that this is true. And my work at NOAA leaves me very confident in the tens of thousands of people who work on your behalf every single day to take the pulse of the planet and to make sure that that is provided to you and provided to your public officials and your corporate officials in ways that offer promise of being helpful in this direction. I believe the degree to which we're willing to channel innovation, to develop new partnerships, to work across disciplines, industries, and organizational boundaries, I think that's going to have a big role to play in what kind of livelihood those 6 little babies who were born next door today face when they're turning 34. I think we owe it to each of them and to all the others arriving with them today across this land to seize the opportunities that are at our fingertips, to apply the knowledge and information and tools that we have, and to deliver them the world they deserve. And I thank you very much for listening and ignoring the game, which I'm supposed to be seeing what the score is over there. 3-zip Dodgers. Go Dodgers. Thank you very much.
So thank you all for coming, and I really want to have you thank Kathy again for starting this off, but you have to realize that NOAA doesn't just use satellites. Look at this sophisticated communication system she has her team.
Whatever it takes.
That's pragmatism at its highest. So I hope you join us for the next 2 days, and thanks. Good night. Yeah.